When you open an ancient text, you usually expect it to smell like incense or, I don't know, sound like poetry.
Right, yeah, like comforting metaphors.
Exactly. You expect these moral platitudes and this general assurance that if you're a relatively decent person, well, some benevolent king in the sky is going to hand you the keys to a nice estate in the afterlife.
The standard spiritual comfort food.
Yeah, exactly. But what we're doing today in this deep dive is, well, we're looking at Surah Maryam, specifically verses 76 through 87. And when you strip away the traditional translations, it is not comforting. It feels like you're sitting in the middle of a hostile corporate audit.
Oh, it really does. And honestly, it is deeply unsettling for people who are used to that comfort food. We have this collective habit of, domesticating revolutionary texts.
Right, we smooth out all the rough edges.
We do. We take ideas that were structurally dangerous to the status quo of their time, and we basically neuter them. We turn them into bedtime stories.
Which is exactly what happened with this passage, right?
100%. The traditional reading of this specific passage is the perfect example of that. It's usually framed as this simple, almost feudal warning. Like, God rewards good deeds with a better place in heaven, while warning rich pagans who brag about their wealth that they'll be stripped of their property on Judgment Day.
And nobody can speak for them unless they have, like, a special VIP permission slip.
Exactly.
It sounds like a medieval king managing his peasants. You obey the king, you get a plot of land. You defy the king, he gets angry, repossesses your camels, and throws you in the dungeon.
Unless, of course, you know a really popular saint who can go to the king and beg for your pardon.
Right, the classic I know a guy defense. It's clean, it's familiar, and most importantly, it doesn't actually demand that we change how our society functions today.
Which is, frankly, exactly why that interpretation has survived for so long. It demands literally nothing of our current economic or political systems.
But when we view this text through the Tului Islam digital audio series, specifically Lecture 12 of their 13-part sequence, that whole stained glass window just shatters.
It completely shatters. The framework they present argues that this passage is not about an angry deity repossessing a rich man's camels on a cloud somewhere.
Yeah.
This text is a masterclass in macroeconomic forensics. It's social physics.
I love that phrase, social physics.
Right. It's detailing the exact, uncompromising natural laws by which the universe liquidates artificial power monopolies, what the text calls Izzah.
Izzah.
And how it replaces them with self-sustaining, multi-generational, constructive assets, which the text calls Al-Baqiyat Al-Salihaat.
Which is just a fundamentally different way of looking at it. I want to pause right there.
Right.
Because framing scripture as, social physics and macroeconomic forensics completely changes the terms of engagement.
It really does. It raises the stakes.
Because if we're looking at this as an audit of reality rather than a mystical threat, it forces a very uncomfortable evaluation of our own lives. Like, for you listening right now, think about your retirement fund or the company you work for, the political systems you vote in.
You just assume they're stable because they're massive.
Right. But what we're going to explore today is how the universe evaluates systemic durability versus structural bankruptcy.
And to really unpack how this cosmic audit works, we have to look at the environment where this text first landed. We have to look at the initial conflict between the early Muslim community and the Quraysh in Mecca.
Because it wasn't just a theological debate in a vacuum. Yeah.
Not at all. It was a brutal clash of economic systems. The early Muslims were, by and large, socially marginalized. They didn't have capital. They didn't control the trade routes.
Right, whereas the Quraysh were essentially the venture capitalists and the cartel leaders of the Arabian Peninsula.
Exactly. Mecca was a massive trade hub, and they held the absolute monopoly. And because they held that monopoly, they used a purely materialistic metric to judge the truth of any system.
They just looked at the bottom line.
Basically. The lecture outlines their argument, and it is incredibly blunt. They looked at the marginalized Muslims and essentially said, who has better houses? Who has more wealth? Who has the most glorious gatherings? Who has the numbers?
Wow. So they equated their financial leverage and their monopoly on resources with being morally and factually correct.
Yes.
It's the ancient equivalent of saying, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich?
Exactly. And we do this constantly today. We conflate market cap with moral weight.
Oh, absolutely. Like, if a CEO builds a massive fortune, even if they exploited thousands of workers and completely destroyed the environment to do it, they get invited to cut ribbons at charity galas.
Right. They're treated as visionaries.
Meanwhile, someone who works diligently in a vital but underpaid profession is just dismissed as, I don't know, lacking drive or intelligence. We use wealth as a proxy for righteousness.
We do, and we just assume that if someone has amassed vast wealth, the universe must somehow be endorsing their methods. But the Tolo Islam lecture highlights a massive systemic correction in the text.
And we should clarify here, the text does not say wealth is inherently evil, right?
Oh, definitely not. There is no romanticization of poverty here at all. Being poor is not a virtue, and being rich is not a sin. Wealth, capital, raw resources, these are essential for human development.
But they are highly volatile.
Exactly. They're incredibly volatile, and the source material uses this brilliant analogy to explain structural positioning. It compares wealth and power to water and human society to a boat.
Okay, a boat on the water.
Right. So if wealth and power are subordinate to permanent constructive values like, if they're used to facilitate human development, equity, and scientific progress, they act like the water underneath the boat.
They lift the society up.
Yes. They provide buoyancy. They allow the civilization to navigate forward.
But if those permanent values are abandoned and accumulating wealth just becomes the sole objective, like the only metric of success,
then the water floods into the boat. The
Right.
very thing that was supposed to carry the society forward becomes the exact mechanism that sinks it. It is a structural inevitability. When a society's primary objective shifts from human development to capital accumulation for a concentrated elite, the weight of that concentrated capital breaks the hull.
I see this parallel in modern startup culture all the time, honestly. Just because a company gets a massive Series A funding round like they suddenly have hundreds of millions of dollars, it doesn't mean their foundational business model is actually viable.
Right. They've got massive offices, catered lunches.
Yeah, their gatherings are, as the Quraysh would say, glorious.
Glorious gatherings, exactly.
But that immediate influx of cash is what the text might call a hasty benefit. If the underlying unit economics are broken, if they aren't actually producing a constructive asset that aligns with market reality, what happens? The funding eventually dries up.
The water floods the boat.
The company goes bankrupt. They confuse their short-term valuation with long-term systemic durability.
That is a perfect modern parallel. The Quraysh were essentially a heavily funded, hyper-leveraged startup with a completely broken, exploitative business model.
And they were looking down on a bootstrap operation, the early Muslims.
Right, an operation that was quietly building sustainable unit economics based on permanent values. And this confusion between temporary leverage and permanent value brings us to one of the most profound linguistic deconstructions in this entire lecture. We really need to talk about the Arabic word fauna.
Yes, let's get into the weeds on this, because the etymology completely changes the philosophical landscape here.
It really does.
If you look up fauna in a standard translation, it's usually rendered simply as destruction or annihilation.
Right.
It implies a singular event. Something is whole, and then boom, it's destroyed, like a building turning to dust at the end of time.
But systemically, within the Tolu Islam framework, the root meaning of fauna is not instant destruction. It means continuous change, mutation, or being subject to constant alteration.
Wait, continuous change?
Yeah. Something that is fauna is something that never remains in the exact same state from one microsecond to the next. It is the state of perpetual flux.
Okay, so it's not some apocalyptic event in the future. It's a physical reality happening right now to literally everything around us.
Yes. And what is truly fascinating is the biological proof the source brings in to anchor this ancient concept. It uses cellular biology to explain fauna.
Wait, cellular biology in an ancient text?
Well, the modern lecture applies the scientific reality to explain the text's concept. Human biology dictates that our cells completely die and regenerate over a cycle of several years.
Oh, right, like every 7 years or so, you're basically new cells.
Exactly. Right down to the molecular level, you are constantly mutating. The physical human body is the ultimate example of fauna. The physical you that existed 10 years ago does not physically exist today. Those cells are gone.
Okay, that raises a massive philosophical and, frankly, legal problem.
How so?
It's essentially the ship of Theseus paradox applied to human accountability. Like, if I sign a 30-year mortgage with a bank, and 15 years later, not a single physical cell in my brain or my signing hand is the same as the day I signed that contract, who is the bank holding accountable?
Oh, that's a great way to frame it.
Right, because my physical body didn't sign it. Those specific neurons that made the decision have completely regenerated. So if I am purely physical, I am purely fauna, and therefore I cannot be held to a permanent contract.
That is exactly the crisis of materialism. If we are only physical matter, we are only fauna. And any claim to permanence, identity, or long-term accountability is basically an illusion.
So what actually honors the contract?
According to the text, it is the human self, the integrated personality, or what they call the Kuti.
The Kuti.
Yes. The Kuti is the non-physical developmental identity that remains constant through the biological flux. If the self is properly developed in accordance with natural laws, it honors the commitment made a decade ago, even though the physical vehicle has entirely mutated.
Wow. Okay, so applying this to the Koresh, or even to modern elites, the text is saying that relying purely on materialistic metrics like hoarded wealth, physical armies, sheer voter head count, is relying on fauna.
Exactly. It is mathematically guaranteed to mutate, degrade, and just slip through your fingers.
You are trying to build a permanent fortress out of shifting sand.
That's beautifully put. And this state of fauna is set in direct opposition to the next massive conceptual pillar of this passage, Al-Baqiyat Al-Salihaat.
Okay, I have to admit, growing up around more traditional interpretations, Al-Baqiyat Al-Salihaat was always presented as something incredibly passive.
Oh, totally.
It was usually described as a specific set of holy phrases. The idea was that if you sat on a prayer rug and chanted these syllables thousands of times, you were racking up invisible points with God.
Right, like an arcade game.
Exactly. It felt like trying to accumulate frequent flyer miles for the afterlife.
It is the ultimate reduction of a profound civilizational blueprint into just a mere superstition. The idea that you can bribe the architecture of the universe by vibrating your vocal cords in a specific pattern is exactly the kind of feudal nonsense this lecture is tearing apart.
So what does it actually mean then?
In the structural Arabic of the Tului Islam framework, Al-Baqiyat Al-Salihaat literally translates to enduring constructive assets.
Enduring constructive assets. That sounds like terminology from a long-term infrastructure bill, not a prayer book.
Because it is an infrastructure bill for human civilization.
Wow.
Let's break down the words. Al-Baqiyatu refers to that which remains, that which has the structural integrity to endure the constant mutation of fauna.
Okay.
Al-Salihaat refers to that which possesses the capacity to resolve imbalances, to create equity, to construct and reform.
So it's not just lasting, it's actively fixing things.
Exactly. So on an individual level, these are the human selves, the Kuti, that have developed durability through strict adherence to constructive laws.
But it scales up, right?
Massively. On a societal level, Al-Baqiyatu Al-Salihaat are things like scientific breakthroughs. They are equitable legal institutions. They are agricultural innovations, medical advancements, and infrastructures that continuously feed, heal, and elevate human development.
Okay, so if a civil engineer invents a new method for clean water extraction that serves a drought-stricken community for 100 years and it resolves the systemic imbalance, that water system is Al-Baqiyat Al-Salihaat.
Absolutely. That is an enduring constructive asset. It is a manifestation of permanent values in the physical world.
That blows my mind.
And the source material uses a very grounded, practical analogy to explain how something volatile is transformed into something enduring. It uses the butter analogy.
Right. I was struck by this because it's such a domestic image for such a massive philosophical concept. But I actually want to push back on it a little because it seems to introduce a contradiction. Walk us through the nuts and bolts of the butter analogy.
Okay, think about raw milk. It is highly perishable. If you just leave it out in its natural state, it spoils quickly, right? It is highly subject to fauna rapid negative change.
Yeah, nobody wants spoiled milk.
Exactly. But the potential for endurance is in milk, the fat content, but it is undeveloped. To extract that enduring asset, you cannot just leave the milk alone. You have to subject it to a process. You have to churn it.
Right, and churning is violent. It's friction, it's agitation. You are aggressively disrupting the milk to force it to change form.
Yes, it undergoes immense agitation. But through that structural friction, it changes form. It separates. The perishable liquid is left behind, and the essence matures into cream, and eventually it solidifies into butter.
So it achieves a state of, what did the text call it? Changelessness in change.
Exactly. The fat content was always there, but through the correct systemic process, through the friction of effort and alignment with natural laws, it hardens into an enduring asset that lasts significantly longer than the original milk.
Okay, I see where you're going, but here's my pushback. If the ultimate goal is stability and endurance, why is the friction necessary? Like, shouldn't a perfect asset just be stable from the start? Why does the universe require us to put ourselves or our societies through the churning?
That's a great question. It's because stability isn't stagnation. Stagnation is death. If you just leave the milk still, it rots. The friction of life, the challenges, the discipline of adhering to equitable laws when exploitation would be so much easier, the sheer effort required to build infrastructure instead of just consuming resources, that friction is the churning mechanism.
So without the agitation of overcoming obstacles, the human cootie remains soft and perishable.
Exactly. It spoils. The effort required to build Al-Baqiyat Al-Salihaat is what hardens the human self so that it can survive the constant mutation of the physical world.
That completely flips the script on how we view hardship or discipline. It's not a punishment from God, it's the centrifuge.
I love that. Yes, it's the centrifuge. And when you successfully build these enduring constructive assets, the text says you receive thawab.
Thawab.
Yeah.
Now, if Al-Baqiyat Al-Salihaat has been hijacked by the points for heaven narrative, thawab is the currency they use to buy those points, right? People literally use it like a metaphysical bank account. Read this chapter, get 10,000 thawab.
It's tragic how a profound economic and legal principle has been reduced to a superstitious tally mark. The lecture completely dismantles this understanding. Thawab is not a gold star handed out by a cosmic accountant.
What is it then?
It is an Arabic term rooted in corporate and business transactions. It literally translates to return on investment or recoupment.
Wait, really? ROI? The universe operates on an ROI model.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you invest your time, your capital, your intellect, and your physical effort into creating Al-Baqiyat Al-Salihaat, those enduring constructive assets, the universe operates like a flawless, incorruptible market. It pays out a massive ROI. It returns your investment with compound interest.
Wow. But, I can hear the skeptics right now saying, okay, but if we view thawab purely as an economic ROI, doesn't that strip the text of its moral weight? Like, are we just replacing a spiritual transaction with a capitalist one?
That's a crucial distinction to make. We aren't replacing it with a capitalist transaction because human capitalism is inherently flawed and often rewards exploitation.
Right.
The universe's market, the law of requital, is perfectly calibrated to only reward that which is salihat, that which resolves imbalances.
So you cannot get cosmic ROI on a monopoly built on slave labor, no matter how profitable it is in the short term.
Exactly. And furthermore, the text explicitly states that this recoupment is not just delayed gratification for after you die.
Oh, because the traditional view is very much suffer now, get paid in heaven.
Right, but the Tolari Islam framework rejects that delay. It asserts that those who invest in constructive assets receive recoupment in this world first.
In this world.
Yes, they receive societal stability. They achieve true authority, scientific advancement, and civilizational sovereignty. The physics of investment don't just pause because a physical body dies. If a society builds a system that aligns with reality, reality rewards that system with growth. It is an unbroken continuum of development.
But the elites, whether it's the Quraysh and Mecca back then or modern oligarchs today, they despise the idea of long-term constructive investment. Building equitable infrastructure takes generations.
Oh, they hate it. They want a shortcut.
Yeah, they want immediate leverage and they want to lock it in forever. Which brings us to the psychological core of their delusion, the tyranny of unproven assertions.
This is where the text transitions from defining economic terms to actively interrogating the power structures of its time. In verses 77 through 79, we see a direct forensic confrontation with the corrupt elite.
Okay, I'll lay it out for us.
The elite make a very specific, deeply arrogant claim. They look at their current wealth, their monopolies, and they assert, I will certainly be given wealth and children permanently because of my status.
Because I have it now, I am inherently deserving of it, and therefore I will always have it.
Exactly.
It's the arrogance of linear extrapolation. You see this in corporate boardrooms right before a massive crash. A company has 3 great quarters because they monopolized a new tech or exploited some legal loophole, and suddenly the CEO is projecting infinite growth for the next decade.
Yes.
They rely on their current market cap or their sheer size to predict their future viability, completely ignoring the structural rot underneath.
They mistake numerical superiority for systemic integrity. They think because they are big, they are immune to the laws of consequence. And what is so powerful about this passage is how the text fires back.
How does it respond?
It doesn't respond with a mystical curse or a threat of hellfire. It responds with brutal, rationalist skepticism. The universe essentially acts as a forensic auditor and asks 2 devastating questions of the elite. First, has he scaled the heights of unseen data? And second, has he secured a legal contract with reality?
Man, I want to dig into that first question.
Mm.
Has he scaled the heights of unseen data? That phrasing is incredible. It is demanding empirical proof for their claims of future permanence.
Right.
Saying, oh, you guarantee your wealth and power will last forever. Show me the data model. Show me the underlying metrics that support that projection. What exactly constitutes unseen data in this context?
So in the systemic framework, unseen data refers to the long-term structural consequences of current actions that just haven't manifested yet. It's the delayed reaction of cause and effect. If you build an economy on exploited labor, the immediate seen data is high profit margins. The unseen data is the accumulating resentment, the degradation of the workforce's health, the eventual collapse of consumer purchasing power, and the inevitable social revolution.
Oh, wow.
The universe is asking the elite, have you factored in the physics of cause and effect over the next century, or are you just looking at today's ledger?
And obviously they haven't, because if they looked at the unseen data, they would realize their system is mathematically doomed.
Exactly.
Which leads directly to the second question, the concept of the odd. The universe asks if they have secured a legal contract in odd. What does a contract with reality actually look like?
An odd is a verified, data-driven contract with the natural laws of growth and balance. It means your actions, your legal institutions, and your economic models are perfectly aligned with the universal laws of cause and effect. The text completely aggressively rejects ancestral entitlement. It rejects the idea that because your father was a billionaire, your wealth is safe. It rejects the idea that because your empire is sprawling, it will survive.
So if you claim authority, but your societal model relies on extracting resources from the poor to enrich a tiny percentage at the top, you do not have an odd. You are basically operating without a license.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are a structural fraud.
Well.
And the law of requital, the universe's strict cause and effect mechanism, does not count heads. It does not care how many lobbyists you have or how large your army is.
Right.
It only weighs the structural integrity of your actions against the blueprint of natural law.
Okay, let's follow this to its logical conclusion. If an elite system is operating without an odd, if their monopoly is fundamentally a fraud against natural law, they are accumulating massive structural debt.
Massive debt.
What happens when the universe calls in the debt? What does a cosmic audit actually look like when the foreclosure begins?
This is where we get into the terrifying mechanics of social physics in verse 80. When the structural debt exceeds the system's capacity to maintain its illusion of stability, the universe initiates absolute asset foreclosure.
Asset foreclosure.
Yes. The text uses a chilling, definitive phrase, Narathu Mayaklu. We inherit everything he claims.
We inherit everything he claims. That is, wow, the repo men of the cosmos show up.
Exactly. But it's not supernatural beings descending from the sky. It is the natural order reasserting balance.
How does that look in practice?
The raw material resources of the earth, the hoarded capital, the stolen land, the communication infrastructures that the elite claimed as their exclusive property, it is all forcibly repossessed by the environment and the exploited masses under the law of requital. The system simply collapses under the weight of its own internal contradictions.
And what happens to the individual elite in that moment, like the CEO of the monopoly or the corrupt politician or the warlord who thought they were untouchable?
The text is brutally specific about their fate. It says they enter this crisis farda. Farda. This is a crucial Arabic term. It means singular, isolated, completely stripped of external attachments.
Oh, wow.
The elite individual enters the collapse, farda stripped of his network, his capital, his PR team, his sycophants, and his leverage.
Everything.
All the artificial layers of protection he spent his life building are peeled away in an instant. The human self, the undeveloped cootie, is left totally naked to face the direct consequences of its actions in absolute isolation.
That is a profoundly terrifying psychological state, to have your entire identity tied up in your leverage and to suddenly find yourself farda.
Terrifying.
But wait, earlier you mentioned that they thought they were safe because they had built these massive monopolies and cartels. The text calls these alliances Iza. They truly believe these structures made them immune to failure. So how exactly do those structures fail? Do they just get overpowered by a bigger army?
That is the ultimate twist of macroeconomic forensics revealed in verses 81 and 82. They don't just get overpowered from the outside, they implode from the inside. Yes. The elite build Izzah, which traditionalists often translate merely as pride or worshipping false gods. But systemically, Izzah means artificial market monopolies, political leverage, corrupt alliances, or hyper-leveraged financial systems.
Okay, so they're strongholds.
Right. They think these structures are their fortress. But the law of requital is relentless. It dictates that these very monopolies will transform into Didda.
Didda. Explain the mechanism of how Izzah becomes Didda. What is a structural antagonist?
Didda means an opposing force, an internal contradiction, a structural antagonist. The text is revealing a law of social physics. Any alliance or system built purely on exploitation and mutual greed has no enduring internal cohesion.
Because it's not based on permanent values.
Exactly. It is held together only by the continuous flow of stolen resources. The moment the resources begin to shrink or the external pressure rises, the cartel turns on itself.
So the very mechanism of their power becomes the engine of their destruction.
Precisely. And we see this mechanism constantly. Think of a criminal syndicate. As long as the money is flowing, everyone is loyal. The moment the federal indictment comes down.
The underbosses immediately turn state's evidence against the Don to save themselves.
Exactly. Or look at corporate monopolies. A hyper-leveraged financial derivative makes billions for a bank, giving them massive Izzah. But when the housing market shifts even slightly, that exact same derivative, the very asset they built, becomes a toxic liability that bankrupts the entire institution.
The monopoly becomes Didda.
The sycophants turn on the leader. The exploited underclass, which the elite relied on for cheap labor, revolts and dismantles the factories. The fortress doesn't just fall, it crushes the people inside it.
It's the physics of a top-heavy structure. Gravity isn't punishing the building defied the laws of engineering, so gravity merely executes the inevitable collapse.
Beautifully said.
But surely the elite know this risk. In traditional theology, they always have a psychological safety net. Even if the system collapses, even if they are caught dead to rights in the audit, they believe they have an ace in the hole. They believe in shafa.
Ah, shafa. Intercession. If there is one concept in traditional religion that has been weaponized to protect corrupt elites, it is the superstitious distortion of shafa. The Tolu Islam lecture takes an absolute sledgehammer to this idea.
Let's define the traditional view first, so we fully understand the magnitude of what is being torn down. How is shafa usually sold to the masses?
The traditional superstitious view of shafa is pure, unadulterated cosmic nepotism.
Cosmic nepotism.
Wow. It is the belief that on the day of judgment you might be a terrible person. You might have been a corrupt leader who starved thousands or a CEO who knowingly poisoned a water supply for profit. But if you belong to the right religious sect, or if you regularly visited the shrine of a specific saint, that holy figure will step in front of God on your behalf.
Oh, I see where this is going.
They will essentially say, look, I know this guy's ledger is completely bankrupt and he ruined society, but he's with me. Do me a personal favor and let him off the hook.
And God, swayed by the saint's popularity, just rips up the audit and lets the criminal into paradise.
That's the traditional belief, yes.
It is literally the, I know a guy defense. I committed cosmic tax fraud, but I play golf with the judge's son, so I'm getting off with a warning.
Yeah.
When you say it out loud, it is incredibly offensive. It reduces the ultimate terrifying justice of the universe to a corrupt, small-town traffic court where favors are traded in the back room.
It completely obliterates the concept of cause and effect. It makes a mockery of the law of requital. Think about it logically. If a human judge lets a guilty, unrepentant murderer walk free just because the judge's friend asked nicely, we would demand that judge be disbarred and imprisoned.
Who would be outraged?
That is not a just judge. That is a corrupt judge. Yet traditional theology projects this exact corruption onto the creator of the universe. The systemic framework aggressively redefines shafa. It strips away the nepotism and redefines it as contractual compatibility and factual legal witnessing.
Okay, this is vital. If we remove the nepotism, how does shafa actually function in a rational, data-driven framework?
The source uses a brilliant legal analogy. In a functional, strictly data-driven courtroom, an intercessor or a witness, a shafi, cannot just walk in and beg for a personal favor. A true witness must meet two criteria.
Okay, what are they?
First, they must have direct, empirical, factual knowledge of the events. Second, and most importantly, they must stand in perfect alignment with the law themselves. You cannot intermediate, you cannot balance a system unless you have a functional systemic contract, an ad, with the universal laws of balance, which the text refers to as ar-Rahman.
So shafa isn't breaking the rules to save a friend. It's testifying that the rules were actually followed.
Exactly. The text explicitly states in verse 87 that no one possesses the power of Shifa except those who have taken an odd with Ar-Rahman, meaning only those whose own lives, systems, and actions are inverified. Contractual compliance with the laws of constructive growth can stand as witnesses.
That makes so much more sense.
They don't save you from the consequences of your actions. They testify to the constructive assets you actually built.
Let me translate this to a modern corporate scenario to make sure I have this right. Imagine a massive corporation collapses, and the SEC brings the CEO in for a massive audit. The CEO can't just bring in a famous politician friend to say, he's a good guy, let it go.
Right.
The only person who can intervene, the true Shafi, is an independent forensic accountant who can bring verified ledger data showing that, despite the collapse, specific divisions of the company were actually operating legally and producing real value. The accountant can't save the fraudulent parts of the business, but they can verify the parts that complied with the law.
That is a phenomenal analogy, yes. There are no shortcuts. There is no nepotism in the physics of the universe. If your cootie yourself is undeveloped, if you are structurally bankrupt and your ledger is full of exploitation, no prophet, no saint, and no politician can step in and magically declare you solve it.
You cannot bribe the cosmic courtroom.
Exactly.
That is incredibly empowering for the marginalized because
Yeah.
it guarantees absolute justice.
Huh?
But it's utterly terrifying if you are on the wrong side of the equation.
Absolutely terrifying.
If you take away the safety net of nepotism, the elite are left completely exposed. Which leads us to the psychological reaction to this exposure, found in verses 83 and 84. When the elite realize that their monopolies are turning into ditta, and they realize that no magical intercession is going to save them, they don't just quietly resign, they get desperate.
They get exceptionally dangerous. When exploitative systems begin to fail, the elites deploy their final weapon. The text points out that they utilize shayatin.
Shayatin. Now, again, we have to strip away the medieval imagery, right?
We do. Traditionally, shayatin is translated as devils or literal demons whispering in ears. But in this systemic socio-political context, shayatin refers to human demagogues, propagandists, spin doctors, and agents of chaos.
The political agitators,
Yeah.
the talking heads who go on television to manufacture outrage.
Exactly. When the structural audit begins and the elite realize their economic model is failing, they use these demagogues to agitate the masses into destructive frenzies. They manufacture culture wars. They stoke racial or class division.
Wow.
They try to create so much noise, fear, and structural damage that the population is distracted from the actual economic foreclosure happening behind the scenes.
It's the oldest strategy in the book.
Yeah.
When you can't govern, agitate. When your ledger is bankrupt, start a fire in the accounting department so no one can read the numbers.
That's exactly what it is.
We see this playing out in real time in global politics right now. When a regime cannot provide basic infrastructure, when it cannot produce Al-Baqiyat Al-Salihaat, it immediately turns to finding a scapegoat and whipping the public into a frenzy. So what is the text's advice to the people who are actually trying to build constructive assets while this chaos is swirling around them?
It does feel overwhelming, right?
Yeah, because when the elite unleash the shayateen, when the propaganda is at full volume, it looks like they are winning.
The text provides a remarkably calm, almost chillingly confident directive to those aligning with natural law. Do not rush.
Without rush.
It tells them not to panic, not to be provoked into premature reactionary violence, and not to despair. Why? Because the universe is strictly counting down their days. The math is already done. The collapse of the exploitative system is structurally guaranteed by the law of requital.
Do not rush. The universe is strictly counting down their days. That requires an immense level of structural confidence. It means recognizing that the agitation of the elite is not a sign of their growing strength. It is a symptom of their impending foreclosure.
Right.
Like a dying star, you know? It expands massively and burns violently right before it collapses into a black hole.
Exactly. The violent agitation is the death rattle of the monopoly. And this countdown culminates in the ultimate diverging outcomes described in verses 85 and 86. This is where the audit is finalized, and the imagery used in the Arabic is flawless in its psychological precision.
Let's unpack the outcomes.
Let's look first at those who invested in Al-Baqiyat Al-Salihaat, those who endured the churning, built enduring assets, and aligned with natural law. The text says they arrive at the ultimate reality as wafda.
Wafda. Let's break down the nuance of that word.
Wafda refers to an honored delegation, a diplomatic envoy. It implies arriving as an esteemed state guest. They are received with full diplomatic protocol. This means that in the next phase of development, whether you interpret this as the pinnacle of societal achievement in this physical world, or the next phase of conscious existence after biological death, they are not treated as subjects or refugees. They are provided with the absolute best infrastructure, the resources, and the respect necessary for even further infinite growth.
They aren't just surviving the audit. They're being hosted by the universe to continue building.
Yes.
That is the ultimate ROI. They build constructive capacity, so the universe gives them a larger canvas to construct upon. And in stark contrast, the corrupt elite who operated on exploitation.
In stark contrast, those who operated on exploitative monopolies, who relied on the illusion of fauna, they are driven into the consequences of their actions like Virda.
Virda. Just the phonetic contrast. Wafda versus Virda is striking. What does Virda mean?
Virda conjures the specific imagery of thirsty cattle rushing madly, uncontrollably toward a watering hole.
Thirsty cat.
Yes. They are not being led with dignity. They are driven by a sheer, agonizing internal thirst. Because they spent their entire existence consuming resources rather than constructing value, because they built no enduring internal assets within their kuti, they arrive at the ultimate reality completely parched.
Wow.
The very crimes they committed, the exploitation they engaged in, creates an unquenchable internal fire. It is a systemic thirst that draws them inevitably to their own destruction. They are not thrown into a fire by an angry guard. They are driven into ruin by the physics of their own bankruptcy.
It's the ultimate tragic implosion. They spent their lives trying to monopolize the water, and in the end, they die of an internal thirst they created themselves.
If we link this back to you, the listener, this is why this text isn't a bedtime story. The universe is operating on strict, unrelenting physics.
The laws of cause and effect do not pause for your social status, your bank account balance, or your religious affiliation. Are you building protocols for growth? Are you developing a kuti, an integrated self that can endure the continuous mutation of the physical world? Or are you just desperately trying to quench an immediate thirst with artificial monopolies that are mathematically guaranteed to collapse?
That is the defining question of human existence. What Lecture 12 proves is that this text is not offering comforting platitudes. It is offering a stark, highly rational blueprint for civilizational and personal survival.
Right.
True power isn't in numbers. It's not in hoarded wealth. And it is certainly not in who you know in some imagined cosmic hierarchy. True power is in strict, verified, data-driven adherence to the universe's natural laws of constructive growth. The ledger will be balanced.
I am just sitting here absorbing the weight of this. The depth is staggering. Artificial monopolies are mathematically dismantled, human assets are forensically audited based on their structural durability, and ultimate authority is strictly bound to contractual compliance with natural law.
It's a complete paradigm shift.
It isn't just a religious commentary. It is a unified theory of socioeconomic physics. And realizing that this brings us right to the absolute edge of this entire 13-part analytical sequence, it's quite literally a cliffhanger.
It is the ultimate setup. The stage is completely set for the final ideological showdown.
I can't wait.
In our final session, Lecture 13 of 13, we are going to tackle Surah Maryam, Ayat 88 to the end. And if you thought today was disruptive to the traditional mindset, just wait.
We're going even deeper.
We're going to witness the ultimate rationalist demolition of the cosmic sonship myth. We will see the literal shaking of the universe under the weight of unproven dogmas, and we will unpack the final, definitive civilizational verdict of the Tolu Islam strategy engine. It is the culmination of everything we've built.
So step out of the stained glass lighting, put away the comforting illusions of nepotism, and ask yourself a very grounded question. When the universe demands to see your ledger, what exactly is your baseline? Are you operating on temporary leverage, or are you structurally solvent? See you next time for the finale.